Welcome to another FME Fireside with Abley Digital Engineering. My name's Gavin, this is Todd and Hamish, and today we'll be calling all callers. We're going to be talking about all the different callers that FME has wrapped up into transformers and some of our favorites, some of the ones we use in some obscure ways, I think, in the past, and just a discussion about all the callers that are out there.
So before we jumped into here, I had a quick look just to recap some of the callers that FME has, and there's probably about a dozen, maybe slightly more across both the inbuilt FME ones and the ones on the hub. And we're not going to cover all of them because I know
there's more on the hub, right? There's like 15 or 20. I don't know.
There's quite a good number out there, and some of them I've never heard of or never had to use. But one of the ones that I frequently use is the HTTP caller, and as the name sort of suggests, it makes HTTP calls, and that can be a post, a get, a delete, a head, any of sort of your standard HTTP requests, and that's really useful for integrating your FME processes and tools with other APIs, because a lot of services out there, say for example Twilio, which is a SMS or a phone call service, you can interact with that through an HTTP caller and call their API.
You were just in there today, right?
Yeah, but I was actually using, I can't remember if it was the Twilio caller.
There we go.
But you know, there is something already created for, I know there is a Twilio caller. I'm not sure if my one's from years ago. So I'm not sure if it's the same thing or, but I remember grabbing a custom transformer. But yeah, and that is, callers do something that's amazing, like cool things.
Yeah.
Who would have thought?
Like the name
but
suggests.
actually, I was just thinking, why, there are lots and lots of things in FME.
Yep.
Do we know why they call them a caller?
Because they make external calls.
I think that's why.
But
I think that's why this is a really good conversation, because I really enjoy the simplicity of it. In reality, system caller is one of my favorites. I mean, I use HTTP all the time because it's accessing the web. But I also use system caller quite a bit too. And it's because you can use other programs and then pass in the variables that you need to associate it with. For example, I have used AWS CLI, command line interface, for any application if you think about it, and then you just pass in whatever those variables are that you need to run the program and what you're using it for. And I feel like what those callers allow you to do is access some of those programs outside of FME.
And not relying on SAFE or FME to produce a specific transformer.
I'll throw it out there. The FME Function Caller doesn't call a caller outside of FME.
No, nor does the Python caller.
Yeah.
Well, the Python caller can also be used to call external Python libraries, but I'm sure we'll touch on that.
Yeah.
But just looping back to the HTTP caller, not only it also provides a whole bunch of functionality around how you construct your calls, so how you can pass through parameters, you can make dynamic calls, you can integrate various security protocols, so whether it's a basic or a web connection or web digest, I think is another one. The typical ones are sort of your basic, which is username and password and a web connection. And that allows you to not only integrate with new or other external applications, but you can also do things with FME server itself. So where you want to interact with your FME server from your FME workbench and you can't, and it's more than just running a process, you can use an HTTP caller to call the REST API. You can do some things with ArcGIS server that you can't do through your readers and writers. You can really expand on pretty much anything.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. So I mean, with the HTTP caller, in your example of using it with FME server, having that API there, like I've got situations where a process actually creates a schedule in the future to run another process and fills it all out. But also, the HTTP callers keeps changing as well. We've got,
that's
just
right.
the inclusions of amount of calls and stuff.
2021, how they released the ability now to do simultaneous calls.
Yeah.
So you can essentially, if you pass 100 features through, you can say keep 20
As
open
long as you know
connections.
that the actual endpoint can cope with it.
Can cope with it, but you can have multiple concurrent connections now, which previously you would have only been able to do if you put it in a custom transformer and parallelized it, but then you've got limitations on that as well. So you've really, as it develops, you've actually got a very powerful tool that you can use.
Yeah. And I'll bring up the one thing, I've mentioned it before, but the one thing I'd love to see is, at the moment you can choose that web connection for authorization, but you've still got to put in a separate URL or details at the top of the HTTP. Like, I would like to be able to get that, some like parameters or attributes that you can pass into that, being able to pass in details related to that web connection.
So say if you had a ArcGIS online web connection that you could pass through the...
Well, it's not so much ArcGIS Online, it's more Esri Portal.
Esri Portal paths through the portal URL and information around that.
So that you don't need to have a separate attribute to hold that information.
And that means you can deliver it to an external party and say, all you need is your web connection, and everything else just
works.
Populates and works.
And I mean, HTTP caller, it'd be the most used caller, I would assume, by probably a long way. I'm going to hark back to one of my favourites is the FME Function Caller.
And that's a very low level.
It's and I think it's one that not many people would use, and I can understand why.
You do most of that stuff in your attribute stuff, right?
You can call your functions.
Yeah.
So sitting underneath FME is your functions and factories, and there's some good technical documentation under the documentation in the community site, and that will tell you all the functions that you can do and all that sort of stuff. And sometimes it's just, I don't know, sometimes it's just easy to use them if you're doing something specific. Yeah. And
I'd say, as Gavin alluded to, a lot of the things in the FME function caller, if you're dealing with strings or numbers, you could just do them in the attribute creator. But a lot of people probably do just use the function caller, but only really scratching the surface and not realising just how deep and advanced that caller can go.
You can do all your buffers with all sorts of things. So
you could essentially recreate the bufferer with a FME function caller.
The bufferer, and now it's gone out of my mind, but the offset curve generator.
Probably offsetter then as well.
No, offset is offset, not buffer. But I'm
just trying to remember what else is in as far as functions.
Lots and lots. I mean, it's still the underlying guts of FME.
So if you look at the FME API, it details all of them, and you can basically just call those.
So that's one that I like. The Python caller.
That's what I was thinking. It's got to be number 2 as far as popularity goes.
Surely.
Primarily because anybody who does GIS has
some Python. Generally has some Python. Whether it's QGIS or
I get breaks out.
But I might almost argue that the Python caller might be more used than the HTTP caller.
No.
You don't reckon?
No, because I think a lot of FME users are using FME kind of as I don't want to say as a supplement to Python, but oftentimes it's a supplement or replacement for Python.
Well, sometimes you use Python to do something that FME just can't.
Right.
So I'm using some of the more... I don't want to use the word complex, but some of the more specific raster functions that ArcGIS has inbuilt. So watershed analysis, that's a one function in ArcPy, but to replicate something like that in FME, you'd have to go through a pretty robust process of building it and analysing it, whereas using the Python caller, you can just call ArcPy and build your function, get your result instantly.
Yeah.
And the Python caller, it's there, it's easy. You just need to know a little bit about FME Python to be able to run.
And there's a few little gotchas, and I've been through with a couple of our clients who have written a Python script
and
then tried to put it into FME and really struggled.
Yeah.
But there's just a few little gotchas, like when you pass something into the FME Python caller, it's expecting, or it's always going to pass through a feature. So you have to set your Python function up to accept that feature, otherwise you're going to have issues.
If you're doing something in the feature.
And things like setting your right Python version, but that's a whole other...
Yeah, we could do that in another conversation.
And one of the, I'm going to say most requested extra features that people would like to see on their Python caller is a rejected port.
Yeah.
So
I'll do that with an error attribute in the tester afterwards.
yes, I do too, and also writing out stuff to the log file as well,
or a better IDE.
Yes, yeah, I've been already, yeah.
But that's,
so
again,
where you can actually see the context of what you're writing and seeing how it fits.
Yeah, another library that I really use, and that can be done with both the system caller, which I'm sure we'll touch on, and Python caller, is OpenCV. And that's been a really powerful tool. So for RetroLens, which is a historic imagery viewer that we host that covers all of New Zealand with historic imagery, all that imagery is processed by OpenCV in a Python caller. So FME will take these massive TIFFs, 600-700 megabytes, pass them through OpenCV, watermark them, compress them, and do a few other sort of distortion and cleaning things, and then split them back into FME. FME will copy them over to the right location, set up the file structure, and then spit them out to the web server. So that's all being handled. A lot of the heavy work's being handled by a Python caller and OpenCV. But then libraries like that also exist as standalone binaries, which can be used with the system caller.
Yeah, and that system caller, it's just one of those things, like I mentioned. It can handle some unique functions, or not functions, but applications that you're wanting to use, programs you're wanting to use, maybe out of the norm of what you're going to be doing with FME.
Yeah, I think one thing about a system caller is you want to make sure that it is beyond what FME can do, because I have seen it where people have called SQL statements from a system caller, and I'm going, you've got all this stuff in there to do it. You don't need it. But system caller is great for those things when you need it.
Yeah, and I guess that was one of the things with what I was describing, AWS CLI. The difference between that and using the S3 connector, whatnot, it was just to generate a pre-signed URL on files that already existed. So instead of pulling it down and rewriting with a pre-signed URL, I could just use the CLI to apply a pre-signed URL to a file that existed already up there. So it's just much faster to do that. And that's one very small example. But so that's a few callers that we've talked about today. There are many more, like we talked about. I'm sure that there's some that we have used and we enjoy using when we need to. But if anybody has any questions about callers, you're welcome to reach out to us. We're always willing to chat FME.
Or tell us about your favourite caller.
Yeah, that's a good idea too.
Because I know a few that are really popular, the R caller and the TCL caller, I've never
calls popular.
I've never used either of them simply because I don't know R or TCL, but I see regularly on the forum people posting questions about how to use them and how to make the most out of them.
But awesome, it was a good chat today, and we'll be back with you guys again. Once again, my name's Gavin, this is Todd and Hamish. We are Abley's digital engineering team. Thanks for joining us.